This is Right to Life Radio with John Girardi on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400, a production of Right to Life of Central California. And now, here's your host, John Girardi.
We're once again taking content from the most liberal rag, the most liberal newspaper, the most liberal journal, the most liberal magazine, the most liberal publication in the entire United States of America. Is it the New York Times? No. Is it the Washington Post? No. Is it CNN? No. Is it MSNBC? No. It's the New England Journal of Medicine. We're drilling in to learn about what the elites, the medical public policy elites who publish all their thoughts very freely in the New England Journal of Medicine, what their plan is for future abortion policy. And we'll learn today why elections matter. You're listening to Right to Life Radio here on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400, a production, as always, of Right to Life of Central California, rtlcc.org, if you want to learn more about us. Joining me today, as often, Mr. Jonathan Keller from California Family Council. How you doing, Jonathan?
I'm pretty good, John. Happy to be back from the beautiful flatness that is eastern Kansas.
Yeah. Eastern, yeah, that sounds sounds pretty flat and pretty desolate. I don't know that I've been in Kansas, but it was a long time ago. I haven't driven through it though. I've driven through Nebraska though, and that is flat. Actually, I did this drive from South Bend to California.
Oof.
Where basically,
how long of a drive is that?
It's like 2 days.
Oof.
Yeah. So coming home from college one year, my brother and I drove because my brother needed his car. So we drove, I think we took 80 and then we took 70 and then we took Interstate 15. Our route was Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Colorado, and then into the Rocky Mountains, Utah, a little bit of Utah,
the corner,
a little bit of Nevada and Arizona, right at their corners, and then into California.
Yeah,
and in that corridor of Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Colorado, the drive gets more and more desolate with each state you get into.
Yes.
So like Illinois is more boring than Indiana, and then Iowa is more boring than Illinois, and then Nebraska is even more boring than Iowa. And then eastern Colorado, before you get to the Rocky Mountains, is basically it's like you're on the surface of Mars. Basically, it's just flat, and there's nothing, and then all of a sudden, zoop! Here are the Rocky Mountains right in front of you.
That's very similar to Kansas in that it is very flat, and the funny thing is they do have this very gradual slope up. By the time you get out to western Kansas, where my dad's family is from, it is flat as a pancake. You can't see a hill for miles, but it's also 3,000 feet elevation. It's really weird. It's this slow continental slope.
It's weird. It's like it's a plane, and it's so big. It's like people should refer to it as the Great Plains.
They are great plains. Let me tell you.
Really good. I've never seen. These are the greatest plains, the best plains you're ever going to see.
You will appreciate this, John, from being in a place that is different weather conditions than Fresno. We went to the zoo on Monday morning, and at the zoo, it was a nice and balmy 80 degrees and 80% humidity.
Ooh.
And then
a little 80-80 action.
And then in the afternoon, it rained.
Oh, great. That's wonderful. It's always great when there's a thunderstorm in the morning. That's a real Midwestern delight.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right. Well, you didn't come to this radio show to hear us talk about Kansas weather patterns.
If you want crop reports, that's another show.
Actually, yeah, you can listen to that every weekday morning from 5 to 6. It's I forget the name of the show here on Power Talk, but it's the Farm Show. Anyway, right before Glenn Beck. Okay, we're here to talk about some pro-life stuff. Now, as I've said multiple times, there are two shadow producers of this show, my wife and my mom. They feed me with they feed me with food, but they also feed me with interesting articles, mostly with food. I'm holding in my hands not an actual copy of the New England Journal of Medicine, but a printout of it, because I think this was an online article. Anyway, this is a perspective piece, so I guess basically like an op-ed, entitled Time to Reevaluate U.S. Mifepristone Restrictions. It's written by Dr. Jane Henney. Sonia Henney. Sonia Henney's out. How about Danny Noonan? And that's a line from Caddyshack. Don't worry about it. And Dr. Helene D. Gale, MD, and then she has another initial after her name, MPH.
Masters of Public Health.
Masters of Public Health. There you go. I thought it stood for miles per hour. So Dr. Jane Henney and Dr. Helene Gale wrote this op-ed piece that was published by the New England Journal of Medicine. I think it might have been just published in their online-only section. So my mom printed it out for me. And it's kind of troubling. And it gives us evidence of this critical fact. Elections matter. And specifically, presidential elections matter. Because whoever wins the presidency, they wind up appointing a lot of people. They wind up appointing a lot of people to a lot of positions all over the federal government.
It's almost like there's this swamp of people that have built up over the years.
Yeah, it kind of... Who was the first person to say that? Anyway, so let me read this article. Now, the perspective, time to reevaluate U.S. mifepristone restrictions. For those of you who don't know what mifepristone is RU-486. It is chemical abortion. It is medication abortion. And again, this is not the morning after pill. We're talking about prescription medication that is used to induce a miscarriage at up to 10 weeks of pregnancy. Okay? So this is not the morning after pill. This is aborting a child up to 10 weeks of pregnancy, giving a woman medication basically to artificially induce a miscarriage. And all of the health risks associated with a miscarriage are part and parcel of mifepristone. Okay? There have been, I think, some 24 women who have died from mifepristone since it was first introduced, since the FDA first approved it in 2000. There have been thousands of women who have hemorrhaged, who've had to go to the hospital, out of the 3.7 million women who have taken it. All right. So,
not to mention the 3.7 million approximately little boys and girls who have died
who have been aborted. Yeah. I should say there have been 3.7 million abortions through this. I don't know if it's been 3.7 million women. It's that number is presumably smaller if you have multiple women taking it multiple times. All right. So let me read this article. In September of 2000, the Food and Drug Administration, of which one of us was commissioner at the time, approved mifepristone, one of two medications used to end early unwanted pregnancies. And again, it's just this euphemistic language about ending unwanted pregnancy, ending early unwanted pregnancy, aborting a child. At that time, because of limited clinical trial data from the United States, the FDA simultaneously imposed various restrictions, including a limited distribution system to ensure that the benefits outweighed the risks of the newly approved drug. Now, after nearly 2 decades of actual use, additional research, and a comprehensive review conducted by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, which the other one of us co-chaired, all of which clearly demonstrate that mifepristone is extremely safe and effective, we believe that the distribution restrictions may no longer be appropriate. So they seem to be advocating in this. It's kind of a vague article. It's not particularly long. They go on to talk about what mifepristone does. They talk about how safe it is by cherry-picking all of the best statistics.
John, Senator Connie Leyva needs something authoritative to cite when she is defending this in committees.
Yes, exactly.
She needs to have the white-coated UC Davis medical students be able to wave around and say,
something.
Well, this journal of art...
safe. The New England Journal of Medicine. See, it's safe.
And you have to trust me because I'm wearing a white coat.
There you go. Even though I'm just a medical student, and as my dad has said about medical students... So my dad is a doctor at Valley Children's and has often joked about medical students. Like when a medical student is like helping out within the clinic or whatever, helping out, I say with scare quotes, find me a medical student who doesn't triple my workload and I will kiss the ground that he walks on. So that's my dad's opinion of medical students.
Your dad is not sexist.
Yes,
so.
That's true. He'll kiss the ground that she walks on too. So basically what they're saying is there are a bunch of restrictions around the distribution of mifepristone. It has to be prescribed. You have to take it. You have to take the initial drug, I believe, mifepristone itself, within the clinical setting. And then when you go home, you take misoprostol, which is... So basically, chemical abortion, it requires 2 drugs. First, you take mifepristone. That blocks the release of progesterone. It prohibits the baby from adhering to the uterine wall. It cuts off the baby's food supply, and the baby dies. You then, a day or 2 later, take this after the baby has presumably died, you take a second drug called misoprostol. Misoprostol artificially induces labor and artificially induces the miscarriage. So you then expel the baby.
And to clarify, John, you have just described this in a medically accurate way. Very often we hear the second drug described very euphemistically as the misoprostol helps to empty the contents of the uterus.
Right. As opposed to
Inducing,
this starts up a miscarriage.
Yeah. It chemically induces labor.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that is what, when my wife was in labor and was very overdue, because my son, look, John, I have been late to many things over my life. I have never been 13 days late to an appointment that I had.
That is,
my son was.
I'm not sure about that. Anyway, so basically, here's what they seem to be advocating. They seem to be advocating, one, that the restrictions on taking mifepristone within a clinical context, this pretty dangerous drug that you shouldn't have anybody take it because it's inhibiting important hormones. This should not be taken in the clinical context anymore. They're saying you should be able just to take it at home whenever you want to. They're arguing that this procedure that has all these attendant health risks should be completely deregulated in almost every single way, that you shouldn't require an ultrasound beforehand. It's really a pretty remarkable thing that's being advocated, and again, in one of the leading medical journals in the United States. We're going to dig into it a little bit more right after the break. You're listening to Right to Life Radio on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400, etc. Right to Life Radio here on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. Always playing the hits. We've got great music this week, by the way, so just stay tuned for that.
Breaking out the deep cuts.
Oh yeah. Well, it's not really deep cuts. We're only going with bangers this week. We're only going with like headliner, number one hit type things.
But I think that is the first appearance of Hotel California on Right to Life Radio.
Yeah, I think so. We've had other Eagles. I generally have tried to stay away from like the most popular song of a band, for those who haven't noticed. But this week I was like, forget it. I'm going to do the most popular songs of a couple of musical acts this week. So, Right to Life Radio. Thank you all so much for tuning in here on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. All right. So we've been talking about this article from the New England Journal of Medicine, this op-ed piece written by Dr. Jane Henney and Dr. Helene Gale, one of whom was the former head of the FDA. And it's a remarkable article in the sense that basically what they're saying is, the FDA should completely get rid of all of the restrictions it has on medication abortion. It should get rid of any sort of requirement that someone have an ultrasound first before they take medication abortion. We should just trust that, it's okay. It doesn't matter whether a woman's 14 weeks pregnant or 10 weeks pregnant. She should just be able to have a miscarriage, even though, the later on you are in a pregnancy, the more and more serious the complications are from a miscarriage. So that was why there was initially this requirement about an ultrasound before miscarriage to ensure the gestational age of the baby, that the baby wasn't more than 10 weeks along, so that you could prescribe medication abortion and not have a miscarriage, not have an artificially induced miscarriage with lots and lots of complications.
And John, to be clear, that's really the only, quote unquote, for those radio listeners, onerous requirement is the requirement to have an ultrasound. It's not that much more difficult if you're going to go to the doctor and get the prescription.
It's a more difficult process than other. It depends on whether you're treating it as a procedure or as medication. They want to treat this as, taking a prescription level painkiller or taking a prescription level,
or if it's
heartburn medicine or something.
Behind the counter, you think of something like Advil, cold and sinus, Sudafed, something that, okay, yes, you do have to show an ID to buy that. You have to get it behind the counter, but you don't have to have a doctor's prescription to get it.
Right.
Is that what they're essentially saying? Is it that's how easy it should be to get this?
Yeah, I think that's what they're saying. I think they're basically saying is, so like right now, it's more difficult than most prescription medications because you have to go to a clinic and take the first drug in the presence of someone who works at the clinic. and they need to ensure that you're not more than 10 weeks along because you're artificially inducing a miscarriage. Okay, if you're going to artificially induce a miscarriage, there probably needs to be some interaction with healthcare personnel. Okay, most people who have miscarriages interact with healthcare personnel at some point afterwards to check on things like, okay, did everything get expelled? Am I experiencing hemorrhaging? Is this okay? Is that okay? Like, there is a normal process of interaction with healthcare personnel. Here, you're basically they're trying to deregulate this so much. In the committee hearings for SB 24, which is the bill before the California state legislature that would require that medication abortion be made available at the student health centers of all the CSUs and UCs, one of the lines that keeps getting repeated by the witnesses in favor of it is that medication abortion is as safe as taking Tylenol. And by that, they're saying that the rate of adverse outcomes is about the same as Tylenol. What they're not talking about is that the severity of the adverse outcomes from a medication abortion is far outstrips whatever the possibility. I mean, what are the adverse outcomes from Tylenol? But I don't actually know off the top of my head. I'm assuming it's something like nausea or maybe I don't know. I have genuinely no idea. Jonathan, get on that. What?
Yeah.
bad side effects, bad reactions to Tylenol. But they're not as severe as severe hemorrhaging, risk of okay, so Jonathan's pulled it up. Stomach pain, loss of appetite, itching, rash, headache, dark urine, clay-colored stools. Hey, all right, this is an interesting show. None of those are as serious
Jaundice.
as massive hemorrhaging, infection, and/or death.
Get medical help right away if you notice symptoms of a rare serious allergic reaction, including rash, itching, swelling, severe dizziness, or trouble breathing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So there are some, but these are rarely ever is this life-threatening. When you're inducing a miscarriage. There are all kinds of very serious outcomes of a miscarriage that can require urgent medical attention. And the way in which the medical public policy establishment left, who are always well represented in the pages of the New England Journal of Medicine, the way they want to treat medication abortion, they are trying to talk about it. They're trying to speak it into existence. They're trying to speak it into existence that this is just like taking any other kind of pill. This is like taking Tylenol. This is like taking Tums. This is like taking whatever. That it should be no more difficult than going to your pharmacy, and whether it's over the counter or just via a normal prescription where you just take it home and you just do it yourself. Basically, they're trying to put forward this idea that this can be just totally consequence-free, totally simple, totally easy, make abortion totally accessible, ignoring any kinds of possible risks associated. Now, one of the things they state in this article, they talk about mifepristone is more than 97% effective. That means it's at least 2-point-something% not effective. It also leaves out the fact that often mifepristone results in only a partial abortion, a partial expulsion of the body of the baby and of all the stuff that is in your womb, necessitating you to go in for a follow-up abortion.
Yes.
And the percentage of time, the percentages of when that has to happen can vary greatly depending on which studies you're looking at.
To be fair, many people that have Tylenol have to go in for a surgical procedure after taking Tylenol.
Yes, of course.
To counteract the effects of Tylenol.
Right. But this is the blinding ideology of so many of these people in the medical healthcare establishment that they just are so dedicated. This is one of the themes I hate about the sort of left-wing medical public policy establishment when it comes to abortion. And this rears its head in other public policy debates, for example, within the debates about transgenderism and things. They are putting forward as science or as established medical fact concepts that are fundamentally philosophical questions. Okay. Their
Why don't you believe
advocacy,
scientists, John?
Well, exactly.
There are betters. They wear white robes. They come down from on high, and
Yeah,
give us
they come
orders.
out of very expensive, isolated academies of study.
There are secular priests. Come on.
Yeah. Basically, they come forward with these arguments that the public health care policy would indicate that greater access to abortion is important for blah 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 blah, and so we need to deregulate this in this way and that blah blah blah. When really, and they're masking all of this with this veneer of this is just science we're talking here. We're not giving opinion. But it starts with this fundamental philosophical premise that abortion is not something immoral, that abortion is not the deliberate killing of an innocent human being, aka murder. They start with this fundamental moral premise that this is health care. And it's a fundamental moral and philosophical premise that they're starting with, not an objective, neutral, scientific premise that they are starting from. So don't be afraid to push back against people who say, well, we should just listen to what doctors think. No! Their moral, ethical, philosophical expertise is no greater than ours.
Yep.
And in many ways, far less.
Conflict of interest.
There you go. Well, they're making money off of it. All right. We'll be right back with more on this topic right here on Right to Life Radio on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. So we've been talking about this story out of the New England Journal of Medicine, this op-ed piece, I should say, out of the New England Journal of Medicine about basically this is a former head of the FDA who is openly advocating that we should remove all of the restrictions that exist around medication abortion. And those of you who saw the movie Unplanned, by the way, this was one of the two abortions that were depicted in the movie where Abby Johnson was bleeding. She was in extreme pain. This is what medication abortion is. And basically, this is a further push of this mindset that medication abortion is no different from taking Tylenol. Having an abortion is like getting your appendix removed. It's just not a big deal. And they're going to push for that by also pushing for deregulation of medication abortion, which I think is extremely dangerous. Medication abortion is an artificially induced miscarriage. There are all kinds of adverse health outcomes that can and have resulted from it. I think there have been some 24 women who have died from medication abortions. There's all kinds of risk of hemorrhaging, of infection. It's as traumatic as a miscarriage. Okay, and anyone who's been through a miscarriage knows that they're no joke. And there's this ideologically driven. I mean, this also goes into questions of mental health, frankly, that there's been a huge gap in providing mental health services to both to women who have had abortions and to women who have had miscarriages because of this ideological blindness of so many on the left that, no, abortion is totally fine. Abortion is totally moral. There's totally nothing morally questionable about it. So having, aborting a child is like getting your appendix removed. There's nothing important about it. There's nothing significant. There's no woman ever who's had, mental health problems as a result of an abortion, and there's nothing wrong with it. And because of that fear of grappling, this fear of daring to acknowledge that there's a human life that's possibly there, there's been a huge gap in providing care not only for women who have had abortions and who are experiencing mental health problems in its wake, but also for women who have had miscarriages and who have mental health problems in its wake. It's this concept that I've heard described as disenfranchised grief that women experience. So basically they feel like, well, I don't have anyone to turn to because this is not something that I'm supposed to be allowed to grieve for. So no one's here. It's not you're not allowing these women to go through the normal processes of grieving that you normally experience. When a relative dies, you have a funeral, you have publicly acknowledged mourning time, you interact with people.
You have people sending you grief cards, doing meal trains. And then, John, like you said, there's also all sorts of grief support services and groups, whether it is, counseling through your insurance, a mental and emotional support, church groups, that come around and say, this is, I know there are many churches here in Fresno that have a a survivors of suicide family support group, or a widows support group for cancer. Families that have lost people to cancer. All of those people have this socially acceptable and legitimately so form of community around their grief. But in this situation, you're right. It's like the vast part of society, other than Pregnancy Care Center and Rachel's Vineyard and these great services.
The only people who are actually trying to fill the gap and acknowledging that there might be some mental health problem here and trying to help with that are these pro-life ministries, for the most part.
Everybody, and generally speaking, John, if you are not a member of a suicide grief group, the rest of society is not telling the people in your group, your grief is illegitimate. You should feel shame for even whining about this.
In
Just
fact,
move on.
Instead, we're going to promote movements like Shout Your Abortion.
Yes.
Which is so tone deaf around the idea that, like, there's a total refusal to acknowledge that some women may have regretted their abortion or may have very mixed feelings about their abortion or maybe having emotional or psychological trauma or, feel disturbed by what happened. It's really sad. And it's this mindset that is emanating from doctors, from, again, this point I made in the last segment. The pro-choice medical establishment left is trying to, and this seeps its way into mainstream media coverage of it, it seeps its way into all kinds of avenues, is trying to put forward this idea that, well, doctors know best. And doctors are viewing the question of abortion through a scientific, neutral lens. It isn't a question of differing, theologies or differing philosophies or blah, blah, blah. No. Doctors are they're highly trained, specialized people who, don't turn to your priest who, wears white robes and went to a school away from the rest of the world for 7 years to study and learned a specific body of knowledge. Listen to these other people who wear white robes and went away to a school for 7 years to study and blah, 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 blah.
Well, but John, medical doctors, it includes interdisciplinary studies. I mean, if you go to medical school, you are also simultaneously an expert in philosophy and theology.
Right. They cover that a lot. And like, if that's in your third year of medical, that's in your negative first year of medical school. Yeah. So, again, there's this push to make it seem as though doctors are approaching these questions from these sort of positions of neutral, universally accepted knowledge, that it's just based in science. It's just based in the facts. Just the facts, ma'am. And it simply is not true. Doctors are starting with a philosophical assumption that abortion is healthcare, in spite of the fact that abortion is not fixing anything that is wrong with a patient. It is something that is it's much more akin to getting, cosmetic breast implants. It isn't actually correcting a problem. We have a very strong moral and philosophical case on our side that is actually, I believe, far more convincing than theirs. But for various political reasons, for political and financial reasons, people on the medical public policy left have tried to act as though their philosophical presuppositions are simply objective medical fact, and it is not. We need to have the confidence to fire back. All right, we're going to talk about some really dopey abortion arguments. I mean, that's kind of always what we do here. Right after the break, we're going to wade into some religion questions. You're listening to Right to Life Radio on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. A banger, by the way, is a millennial term for a really good song.
I did not realize
Just
that.
in case you were wondering what the heck I was talking about.
Thanks to millennials, John and Holly Girardi, for informing me, the old fogey Gen Xer.
Yeah. Jonathan, the most millennial, not millennial I know.
I'm a Zennial, yo.
Yeah, there you go. Just keep telling yourself
I'm part of that cool micro generation, yo.
AKA just a Gen Xer. Right to Life Radio.
No. I saw this article where they were talking about all the micro generations.
Yeah,
and they said,
yeah.
We're the Oregon Trail generation, man.
You can't just stick me in a box, which is
right.
the most Gen X response ever. Right to Life Radio on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. Thank you all so much for tuning in. All right, we're going to go a little far afield. Right to Life is a non-sectarian, non-religious organization. But I'm going to wade into some religious controversies right now.
Okay.
Right in the here and now.
All
I'm
right.
going to offer, this maybe it's not 100% an opinion expressed by Right to Life of Central California, but I don't think it's so far afield that it's inappropriate of me to talk about it. And I'm gonna wade into some Christian controversies that I was tweeting about this morning. So here is a tweet that I was tweeting back and forth. Our mutual friend, Jonathan, I guess he's more your friend. He's my acquaintance. Kana Gonzalez. Kana Gonzalez he works for Family Research Council. He's a good guy, buddy of Jonathan and mine.
Yeah.
He
in their federal affairs or government affairs department.
Yeah, Family Research Council does a lot of good stuff. Anyway, a lot of good pro-life stuff specifically. He was retweeting this article by some woman named Pam Keith. I don't exactly know who she is. I guess she's a former Democratic candidate for Florida's 18th congressional district. Okay, and she went to Boston College Law School. Typical. There we go.
Spoken
there
like a true
it is.
Notre Damer.
Now, she's a very left-wing person, and she's going to offer some opinions I'm going to rip to shreds. So let me just get all my Boston College jokes out of the way. BC. What does every Boston College student have that no Notre Dame student has? A rejection letter from Notre Dame. BC, which stands for Backup College. Backup College. Boston College is neither in the city of Boston nor is it a college. It's a university. So before you've even set foot there, they've lied to you twice. All right. So with all of my Boston College jokes out of the way, this woman named Pam Keith has these two tweets. She says, in the Gospels, Jesus speaks often about how to treat people. He covers a lot of turf on the sick, lepers, the afflicted, the poor, widows, daughters, sons, tax collectors, travelers, strangers, learned men, fools, the old and the young. But, and she does the thing I hate on Twitter, which is clapping, having the clappy emoji in between all of your words. And she seemed to have picked the ethnically correct, because I believe she's African-American or something. So she has brown hands clapping. So just so you know that she's intersectionally correct with her emojis. But not one word about the unborn. Looking at these grasp at straws responses by people who should know that what the Gospels are and how the words of Jesus are distinguished in them, not one post below claims or can claim that Jesus spoke of the unborn. And that's because he didn't. And it's not like he couldn't have. All right.
Hey, John, I have a question for you. Because this person sounds like, just real quick, I know you're going to get into this specifically, but whenever someone brings that up specifically, Jesus didn't say
Jesus
one word.
never said anything about abortion.
Are you familiar? There's this doctrine. I know it's kind of like an obscure Christian doctrine, but there's this thing that they actually call the Trinity. The idea that like Jesus and the Holy Spirit and God the Father are actually like one person. So if that's the case, like, did Jesus say anything through God like about the unborn in the Old Testament, perhaps? Like,
oh, hey, there you go.
I'm
that
just
maybe
thinking,
that may so basic and basically what she's responding to, she issued her initial tweet. Jesus never said anything about the unborn,
and
then everyone
letter words of Jesus don't mention the word unborn.
Yeah, so then everyone's like, here are all the Bible verses that talk about how unborn children in their mother's wombs are alive and are have life from God and blah 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 blah. She ignores this and says, but Jesus never said anything about it. Well, I mean, Jesus kind of had yes, we attribute certain actions to certain specific persons of the Trinity, like inspiration of the Bible to the Holy Spirit, but we also know that actions of one person of the Trinity are, that the Trinity kind of works in concert in what they do. I apologize, I'm not getting my language perfectly theologically correctly, but it's a little silly to act as though the Holy Spirit inspired words of the Old Testament don't have any relationship to Jesus Christ, aka the second person of the Trinity, God the Son.
Bingo.
So, now, but here's the one thing I want to push back at, because this is something that afflicts, frankly, it afflicts both certain kinds of conservative evangelical Protestant commentators on pro-life things, as well as all kinds of left-wing Protestant and Catholic commentators on the issue of abortion. So this is where I'm positing my religious opinion. It's not necessarily Right to Life Central California's opinion, but I think it's interesting, and I'm going to talk about it. This is my view. people are trying to treat the Bible like it is a compendium of ethical questions, an exhaustive catechism, if you will, of moral questions that provides clear-cut moral answers. And the way in which so many Christians, some Catholic, some Protestant, approach different moral questions of concern today, things that were not of concern 2,000 years ago when Jesus was walking the earth, that were not of concern 4,000 years ago when stuff in the Old Testament was written or happening or whatever. The way they approach it is this really facile attitude of saying, well, and I've seen conservatives say this who say that, well, we're okay with in vitro as long as, conceived children don't die, because there's nothing in the Bible that says it's wrong. Well, yeah, there's nothing in the Bible that says that in vitro fertilization is wrong. There's also nothing in the Bible that says, anything about, I don't know, the development of nuclear weapons. Yep. There's nothing in the Bible that says anything about, surrogate parents. Yep. There's nothing in the Bible that says anything about human cloning. There's nothing in the Bible that says anything about,
There's nothing in the Bible that says anything about equal pay for women.
Certainly not. No one. Anyway, there's nothing. So you're taking these modern day complex questions and acting as though, because you can't cite a chapter and verse conclusive verse from the Bible demonstrating what the position of Christianity should be towards it, that therefore anything goes. And this is incredibly stupid, I think. I think it, for one thing, I would note John chapter 21, verse 25, which says, as I will read, but there are also many other things which Jesus did, which if they were written, every one, the world itself, I think, would not be able to contain the books that should be written. So, first of all, to act as though, well, Jesus never said anything about the unborn. Maybe he did.
Yep.
I don't know. Now, obviously, the greatest hits are probably all in the Gospels. But
now I understand why we're playing the music we're playing this week.
But
I got it.
To act as though the Gospels are just totally in isolation to the, tradition of Christian teaching that it came out of, to ignore things like the Didache, which was this book written in the first century with the teachings of the 12 apostles, which very clearly states that the church was opposed to abortion, to infanticide, and to contraception, to act as though the Bible is just like this standalone thing, which is the sole source of any and all knowledge about not only theological questions, but also ethical questions of any sort. Like, yes, I realize Catholics and Protestants can disagree about the Bible's authority for theological questions, but ethical questions are slightly different.
Yep.
So let's maybe not try to say the Bible doesn't say anything about human cloning, therefore it's okay. It's a dopey argument, and you're a dope if you subscribe to it. And that's how I'm ending the show.
And that's life.
Yes, that is life, Frank Sinatra. Thank you for listening to Right to Life Radio. We'll see you next week. Bye.